Welcome back to another episode. So, this episode will be more of a deep dive into Yale University, or for the undergraduates, you'll be applying to Yale College. So, I just wanted to make clear that the difference between Yale University and Yale College is that Yale University encompasses all the the postgrad sections, so like your master's and your PhD, which makes it like a university. But Yale College is more for the undergraduates, so people like us who are like applying as freshmen. And so what you should actually focus on is tailoring your application to Yale College rather than Yale University. One thing you will also notice is that if you go to Yale University's website and you take a look at their mission statement, it's like very vague. It's just we want the best across the whole world, which doesn't really help because it's not very specific. Whereas if you actually I think I found this photo more in like the archives. It's like the mission statement of Yale College that they updated recently in about 2023. And so, just in general, like if you want to find out what a school is looking for, of course they're looking for excellence in all areas. Like every school is looking for that. But what they say on their website and their supplemental essays are sort of like the really specific traits that they're looking for. And you can trust in the website. I mean, unless you're like a donor, like a legacy, then of course, the same characteristics apply to you, but with not such a high bar. But if you're just like a normal student trying to apply, then you would need this mission statement will be really helpful because your application needs to hit on like all of the aspects that they're looking for, and you have to be academically qualified, and you have to be a good person, at least in your application, in order to even stand a chance. Because I mean, as for international applicants, when you have 1 in 50, for domestic, when you have like maybe 1 in 10 in the early round and 1 in 33 in the regular round, yeah, it's a bloodbath, and you have to really separate yourselves. And this is how you can do it. Okay, so the mission statement is: the mission of Yale College is to seek exceptionally promising students of all backgrounds from across the nation and around the world, to educate them through mental discipline and social experience, to develop their intellectual, moral, civic, and creative capacities to the fullest. Okay, so right off the bat, from this first sentence, you can already see they want to seek not just promising. They specifically put exceptionally promising. And so how do you find exceptionally promising students? You look at their context, you look at how they've outperformed their context. So like what I've always mentioned, it's always about contextual review, holistic review. They look at you as a whole person and of the circumstances that you're born from. Of course, this review is not 100% equitable, but it is pretty decent. So for example, like let's just say you come from like Ghana, for example, like just a random African country. They're very under resourced as compared to the global average. So for example, if you're Ghana and maybe like you have like a 4.0 GPA, your IB score is like a 38, maybe you have like a 1520 SAT, that is exceptionally promising already, because the average in Ghana is like maybe like a 25 for IB, maybe like a 1300, probably not 1300 actually. It's probably like maybe like a 1100 for the SAT. And so you are exceptionally promising based on your context. And so if you're like me, if you're Singaporean, then that bar is raised even almost basically to the roof already. There's a lot of students from Singapore applying with 44s for IB, 90 RPs for A levels, H3 distinctions, and this also applies to places like China, more specifically your Beijing, Shanghai. Taiwan is also another place. Hong Kong is also another place. Korea, a lot of the East Asian countries, they're very difficult because you have many students that are academically qualified, but based on the context of their application and where they're from, they're not really exceptionally promising. They're promising, but they're not exceptional. The exceptionally promising students are basically the students with like global recognition or regional recognition. And this also, of course, applies to American students, local students. Local meaning American in this case. You are basically based on like your state. So like if you're from North Dakota, Montana, South Dakotas, that region, Wyoming, if even though you might have scored like slightly lower, or like your academics might not be as strong and your extracurriculars might not be as deep, you are considered exceptionally promising based off the context of your area. And if you are from states like California, New York, the Bay Area, the New York City metro area, then your bar is just a lot higher as compared to the rest of the country. So that's what it means by exceptionally promising. You have to outperform your context on multiple indicators. Because when you have like 50 applicants and you only can pick one or two, you have to be the top two in that given context. Of course, there is individualized context as well. For example, like if maybe let's just say both your parents died, and I mean this is very crude, but okay, let's just say both your parents, you're an orphan, but yet like your results are like very 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 strong, then perhaps that makes you the most exceptionally promising student, because you might not be the best student from your country, but being the top 10 students of your country when you're an orphan is very very promising, because then the college will ask, so if you had parents, maybe you would have been top one, because that's what it means by promising. Each person in their own context has a different baseline, and it's about how much you outperform this baseline and relative to other people in your applicant pool. So for example, like let's just say your baseline is like 50 and you score like a 90, whereas somebody's baseline is like a 70, and even though they are 99, the 50 to 90 might look more promising than a 70 to 99, if that makes any sense. But of course, you still need to hit a minimum standard. Maybe for Yale, the minimum standard is like a 97. So even though you're 50 to 90, you probably wouldn't make it. Whereas someone maybe from like a 60 to a 97 might beat out someone who is an 80 to a 99 because he has climbed the bigger hill. And having that net improvement could signal to the admissions office that he's exceptionally promising. I mean, it's literally in the word. So it's like your net difference based on your individualized consideration, based on your individual context, but you also need to hit that minimum standard. And for highly selective colleges, that minimum standard is very, very, very high. The next is intellectual, moral, civic, and creative capacities to the fullest. So one thing you might think that, okay, they've basically said everything. What's there to analyze? Clearly, they want all these four. But I will say, what do they put in their first? In the first thing, usually, if you think about like from a psychology point of view, like people put the most important things at the start, right? And they put intellectual. So this is clearly showing that Yale values intellectual flexibility, intellectual capability a lot more than your moral and civic capacities. Now, I'm not saying that you don't need moral and civic capacities. You definitely do, but if you look at it in terms of what they prioritize relative to each other, you definitely prioritize their intellectual capabilities and capacities more than moral and civic. Of course, they're looking for all four. If you're a jackass, you're not getting into Yale. But they do look out for intellectual a lot more, and it's definitely more on their priority list. So, and we continue. The aim of this education is the cultivation of citizens with a rich awareness of our heritage to lead and serve in every sphere of human activity. So basically, just want people to do everything. And Yale College offers a liberal education that aims to, okay, so let's discuss liberal education. So liberal education just means a liberal arts education. It means that they have many, many majors. I think if you look at the Yale website, it's like 80 majors, 2,000 courses, and they give this tagline like, oh, it would take 200 years to finish all the Yale courses, something along those lines. So liberal arts education just means that you can take any course from any major across like 80 majors. Because one thing is that Yale does not have a school of, for example, Columbia has the school of like applied engineering and science, if I'm not wrong. So that's like one example. Then there's like Wharton, there's like the nursing school in UPenn, those like the more famous ones. So it's very clear that Yale College is not pre-professional. It does not have a business school. It does not even have an engineering or a math or applied science school. It just has a liberal arts education. So your application has to show like a connection. You cannot just apply like purely based on math. You need to show your ability to link, to be interdisciplinary. So a lot of people say Yale College looks out for interdisciplinary thinkers. And I mean, that's true because if you look at the mission statement, that's what they're clearly looking out for. So it's not something that's very secret. If you just if you look at it carefully, it's quite obvious. They don't want people with just like STEM backgrounds. They want like they want a diverse academic, a diverse intellectual perspective. That's actually to be as specific as possible. They want a diverse intellectual perspective that can that is unique in their liberal arts education. So you can't just be like a normal STEM student. You really have to show your ability. I think I saw this one episode. Like MIT looks for STEAM profiles. So it's basically STEM, but you put an A in the fourth letter and it becomes STEAM. The A stands for arts. So if you're like a STEM student applying to Yale, if you're able to incorporate some humanities aspect into your application, then you basically you stand out even more. But also that's to say that one thing Yale does look out for is STEM students. They send likely letters to like certain under-resourced groups who are especially looking for STEM because that's one of their institutional priorities as well. So Yale is different in a way that they're actually looking for more STEM students because they are known for their arts and their humanities. So I think also you need to be very careful. Um, if you're applying STEM and you apply to like Princeton or Yale, you might get into Yale rather than Princeton because Princeton has too many STEM students, whereas Yale has a lot of humanities students. And I think one thing about the application process is that you can't apply into a school's strengths. You're trying to apply to the weaknesses. Not saying that schools have weaknesses. I mean, your college's STEM department is probably better than many other schools in the United States and across the world. But more so, admissions officers want what they don't have, and well, clearly they don't have the best STEM students because they're all going to Harvard, Princeton, and Stanford. So that's why, you are considered more promising as compared to all the best humanities students who go to Yale rather than like Stanford or Princeton. Okay, so the first point is to educate talented students of diverse backgrounds to lead and serve in a complex and changing society. So this was before SFFA. So technically, they're not allowed to look at diverse racial backgrounds, but like the admissions officers sort of know, and so that it's this point about like admissions officers not really considering race. Like I'm quite sure they do it. They do consider race implicitly, but not explicitly. But you can just think of diverse backgrounds as just diverse perspective. They want a diverse intellectual perspective, a diverse personal experience, diversity of everything. In general, the admissions officers just want what they don't have. And if you want what you don't have, you gotta look, you have to be diverse, you have to be different, you have to be special. Being special and being diverse is what makes you like a 1 out of 50,000 and makes admissions officers want you because they know that they're not gonna find another of you in the applicant pool. So that diversity can come in many forms, albeit not race, but definitely in personal experience, and for Yale specifically, definitely more intellectual diversity. And I would also want to put a point that intellectual diversity means like a difference of thought. It means how do you approach certain academic issues and from what angle. Like you can say that, you know, like, gosh, I don't have a very good example for this, but I would say like let's just say like in econs, like we always don't want poverty. Okay, that's not a diverse perspective. Everybody wants to help out. Or at least they seem to want to help out until they become a consultant. But everybody wants to solve poverty, to solve the world's global issues. So that's not exactly it's a very common perspective. Maybe they want to solve poverty by giving food aid to underdeveloped countries. Like many people are gonna have this sort of like thinking, you know. But if you say what's a different one? Like for econs, maybe you talk about like behavioral nudges, like behavioral economics. Like you talk about how it, like you use like education I mean, it's not very rare. I think a lot of people still write about this, but you talk about, instead of giving aid specifically, you talk about giving education through online platforms, and like employing behavioral nudges to nudge parents to use, like, I don't know, contraceptives, for example, or like to take vaccinations, these kind of stuff. It's slightly less common. Of course, you can't go left field and just say, oh, I think poverty is good. That's definitely yeah, that's a very diverse perspective, but that's a very contentious perspective, and it's probably not going to get you admitted. So it's just things like these, and the more specialized you are in your field, the more diverse your intellectual perspective is. So, for example, mine is to merge the sociological how with the theological why. So those are like two fields that are firstly, they're very diverse, they're very different, and to try and merge them makes my intellectual perspective even better. Of course, whether I get admitted is another question, but that's just one example. So let's move on to the second point. So the next is to provide a supportive, and I circled this, residential community of learning in which social experience and the free exchange of ideas underpin the pursuit of knowledge. Okay, so here Yale clearly states that they want a goated residential community, is basically what I'm trying to say. And a residential community that's deep in learning. So what this basically means is that you need to be able to show that you are able to live in a residential community. So one of the if I'm not wrong, like the admissions committees in Yale, they have like 3 admissions officers, 1 dean and 1 faculty member, if I'm not wrong. So what this just means is that there is that perspective of, like, from the residential college dean's perspective, like, can this student thrive in a residential community? Can he contribute? Is he just going to be like a loner and do his own thing? Or maybe does he have like some personal qualities that are like questionable? These sort of things, like. And also because Yale has a supplemental essay question on residential community later on, if I'm not mistaken, or something along those lines. Clearly this is an institutional priority for them, or not an institutional priority, but it's just a priority that they look out for. Like, you can't be a douchebag and think that you can get into Yale, or at least on your application. You need to show that you're able to live with other people. Maybe you've been in a residential community before, and then describe like your experience there. And or maybe like your letters of recommendation show that like you're always helping your classmates and your teachers. So clearly that should bring over to your residential community life, and that you're going to help out other people, or you're very like selfless and empathetic. So these are just like sort of the traits. I always talk about these 2 traits that admissions officers look for: maturity and humility. These 2 traits can bring a student very far, and it definitely applies in the classroom and in the residential community as well. Humility is very important these days, and maturity as well. And because it's with maturity and with humility that a love of learning, or like a desire to learn, comes from. Because if you have a sense of arrogance, or like if you're very prideful, you're going to think that you know everything, but you don't. And then you're not really contributing to this community of learners. Because at the end of the day, it's an academic institution. They don't want people to come in to think that they know everything. They want people who come in yearning to learn, because I mean, it's a university, it's not like a place to celebrate your victory. And they also talk about in which social experience and the free exchange of ideas underpin the pursuit of knowledge. So they're basically saying that you have to speak up. You are able to freely speak. You're able to freely speak and exchange your ideas that underpin the pursuit of knowledge. So basically, they're saying that the pursuit of knowledge comes from students exchanging ideas. And then you might ask me, oh, what ideas? Well, diverse ideas. If you have 2 students with very different points of views, that's where the pursuit of knowledge happens. I can't remember who it was, maybe Da Vinci. He wrote like a book basically detailing like how intellectuals think, which is, I mean, he wrote in 1700s. I can't remember the book, but it basically goes along the lines of like how interdisciplinary thinking helps build new knowledge in the world. So that's clearly definitely what Yale is looking out for. I think if you count the number of times I said interdisciplinary, is probably like 10 to 15 already. And in which the social experience. So basically, the pursuit of knowledge also comes from the society, the intellectual community. Like, you can also view this in terms of like your late night talks, for example. Maybe late night talks about like the meaning of life or philosophy. These sort of intellectual experiences, these intellectual exchange of ideas. Or social experience can just be, the ability to work well together in a community. Because, for example, if you're doing a group project with 4 people and then all of y'all can't work properly together, you're not gonna pursue or make new knowledge. You're just gonna stagnate. You're just gonna finish the class and get a grade. So you can also view it from that perspective. Unfortunately, it is quite broad here, but these are maybe the sums of the sort of more specific experiences, so that students can visualize what the mission statement actually is looking for. The next, which I've also explained before, is to cultivate both the broad intellectual, moral, civic, and creative capacities, and the more specialized skills that will allow students to thrive beyond the college gates. So, likewise here, they talk about intellectual is number 1, then moral, number 2, then civic, number 3, and then your creative capacities and the more specialized skills. So it's not just about, maybe I forgot to underline this. It's not just about your intellectual capabilities, but how, so what are some of the specialized skills that you're going to use in order to utilize your intellectual capabilities? It's not just about thinking, it's also about doing. It's basically what Yale is trying to say. We don't want, people to just think. We want people to actually do and to implement. And because that ability to implement will allow students to thrive beyond the college gates. And the last one is draw on the distinctive strengths and traditions of Yale University as a globally recognized leader across the arts, humanities, social sciences, engineering, and the professions. So I did circle arts, humanities here, and professions, because I want you to focus on the order. They put arts at first, it seems like maybe it's like an alphabetical order thing, but of course it's not, because AHSSSSE, E is before S. So, and they put professions at the last. The reason why I put this in black is just because I want to highlight this, that Yale does not have a pre-professional school of anything. They don't have pre-professional business schools like Wharton. They don't have pre-med. They don't have pre-law. It's all study areas, academic areas, not pre-professional areas. They also don't have a nursing school like Wharton. Oh, sorry, like UPenn. So it's very clear that if you are on a pre-professional path, do not apply to Yale. As simple as that. Or change your application, tailor it so that it shows like your interdisciplinary thinking, maybe in the humanities or in the social sciences, but not in the professions, because they put it at the last. They can't officially avoid it, because eventually they're going to have some people who want to do pre-law, pre-med, pre-business, but it's not their priority when they are admitting students. But then they do put arts and humanities, which is what Yale is known for. And it's what they want to continue doing, to be that, to be the progenitor of arts and humanities. And because this is where they actually shine, and they're honestly arguably better than the other Ivy Leagues at. But then again, you see, you're also applying to their strengths. So let's just say if you apply with arts and humanities, you are applying to Yale's strengths. So just be a bit careful. They are, like what I mentioned, they are looking out for more STEM students from under-resourced backgrounds. That's definitely one of their priorities. Okay, lastly, we seek to educate students who are broad-minded and autonomous, capable of making judgments and taking responsibility for their decisions. So this is basically just the same as diverse academic perspectives. But autonomous is a very interesting word. I think if we delve deep into the lexicons of this, autonomous means that you are able, an autonomous driving vehicle, you do things by yourself without people urging and pushing you. So that's what Yale is looking out for. They're looking for people who are self-driven, in another word, who are able to do things because they want to do them from their heart, and not because someone is prodding and poking at them to do it. Capable of making judgments and taking responsibility. So taking responsibility, it just means that you're able to have that. It's another word for saying maturity. You know that you're wrong, And so you take responsibility for your decisions. Some of it might be good decisions, which is perfect, which is very good. But you should also take perhaps a very small opportunity to show how you've made a wrong decision, how you took responsibility and bounce back from it. Because let's be real, admissions officers don't expect perfect because everybody, tries to frame themselves as perfect. And that's definitely not how to say it. Like, it's become so common to the point that sometimes admissions officers look for people who aren't perfect. But you can't just like say, oh, I failed my exam and a full stop and then think that they're going to admit you because of that. No, it's more like, so what do you do afterwards that made you not fail an exam ever again? And what do you learn? And what perspective can you bring to Yale because you failed your exam? So along that train of thought. Next is, we believe that a liberal education should encourage students to become more curious, engaged citizens. So this just means that this can just translate to a love of learning. They want students to continue to become curious, to always want to learn more, to become engaged with the world around them. So not to live like a very like reclusive life. I mean, but this is just in general. It's not really specific to Yale. Like, all schools want curious and engaged students because that's what makes a school. So that's that. And lastly, before I move on, it should also prepare them well for their professional lives and for their educational opportunities and help them develop as active learners who thrive in complex environments. So Yale just basically wants people to continue to learn, like what I mentioned just now, the love of learning, who thrive in complex environments. And so perhaps also you can read through this as Yale wants to develop that complex environment in their residential colleges. I wouldn't say complex, I would say more diverse, because having that diverse intellectual perspective is definitely what Yale is looking for, and that is done through interdisciplinary thinking and taking advantage of Yale's liberal arts education. Okay, so moving on to what Yale looks for. Now you might be thinking, like, what I said just now, this one over here, is the mission statement of Yale College. So it is what Yale looks for, but over here, they explicitly talk about contextual review. So I think there's two aspects of a college application. It's contextual review of your own personal circumstance, so that's you, but also how you can contribute to Yale, which is what this statement basically says. So I think it's just best to read through it, and I think it'll be easier to understand. So many years ago, former Yale president Kingman Brewster wrote that selecting future Yale students was a combination of those who would make the most of the extraordinary resources assembled here, those with a zest to stretch the limits of their talents, and those with an outstanding public motivation. In other words, applicants with a concern for something larger than themselves. Okay, so let's break this down. The admissions office is basically saying that Yale is looking for those who would take the resources that Yale gives them and to utilize it as much as possible. And how they determine this is by your history. Have you made the most of the resources of your high school and of your community? It might not be extraordinary. It might be, under ordinary, or like not. It might be less than what is the norm. But as long as you showed that you made the most of these resources, then the admissions office will make that assumption that you would be able to make the most of the extraordinary resources assembled here. Other than looking at your context, it's also about your essays. What sort of resources will you use here? What are the extraordinary resources at Yale relevant to you? And how you would make the most of them. Because it's not just about you, it's about Yale. What will you bring to Yale? Your perspective. How do your perspectives align with the resources that Yale can provide? Next is also a zest to stretch the limits of their talents. So that just means that they want to see academic potential. Do you have that yearn to desire to do more, like you know that you can do more. You're just I've done so much, I can do more, but only Yale gives me that resource to gives me all the resources for me to be able to do more. I've already made the most. So these two are sort of linked, because you're basically saying that, look, like, I've done everything I could at my school, and honestly, I think Yale is that next step for me. Rather than being just like a local player, I can definitely be a global, like a national player in terms of my academic strengths and my talents. And so you have to also demonstrate to your application, to your extracurricular activities and your essays that you're not done yet. You want to continue learning. You want to continue to grow your talents, to continue to learn from the best at Yale, to continue to learn from the extraordinary resources, to utilize it, to continue to stretch the limits of your talents. And so it's basically like a feedback loop. Like, those who want to make the most of the extraordinary resources assembled at Yale will have that zest to stretch the limits of their talents. And if you are stretching the limits of your talents and having that motivation to do so, you are making the most of the extraordinary resources assembled at Yale. So these two are like interdisciplinary. Yeah, it's just interconnected. Next is, and those with an outstanding public motivation. So in other words, applicants with a concern for something larger than themselves. So this basically means no investment banking, no consultants, no financial whatever jargon. You have to, at least in your application, show that you want to contribute to something, to a cause that is bigger than yourself, and you need to recognize that it is that you need Yale in order to accomplish this motivation. So it's not just about it's not just about showing your application that, hey, I can solve world hunger by myself. That's not what they want, because nobody can solve a problem by themselves. They want Yale to be a place that gives you that resources, that gives you the impetus to solve problems on your own. If you really can solve problems on your own, then why are you applying to Yale? Just start your own business. Just start your own startup. Yale wants to take credit for your success. So if you're already very successful, or you portray yourself as somebody who doesn't really need help, who's already has so much success, then you're just gonna attribute your future success to yourself and not Yale, which they don't want. They want to take credit. They want to be a part of your success, and that's why they want students who need Yale's resources in order to accomplish something that's larger than themselves. And that comes with maturity, and that comes with humility. Humility is very important in order to recognize that you're just one person. But with Yale's resources, with the people at Yale, you can do so much more. And so this, when I first read this, I basically just translated it to myself as, don't be arrogant. You need to show that there's a bigger inspiration. So I linked this to I'll explain later. Actually, let me show you here. What inspires you? Answer in 35 words. So this reminds me of the what inspires you question. Like, so what inspires you? What is that public motivation? And you need to answer, or at least what I did for my essay was I answered what inspires you based on this statement, where I answered about like what was my motivation. So I talked about like my community service and how like I wanted to be like a youth empowerment mentor to continue to inspire self-confidence in youths in my community. So that's like my public motivation, and that's something that's larger than myself, because that's a very difficult task at hand. So these are some of the things that you have to look out for in the mission statement, and what Yale explicitly says, and then you show it through your application, or you show it through the essays. And he said that we have to make the Hanji judgment as to whether or not, with Yale's help, I should have highlighted with Yale's help, by the way. So if you're like a startup, you already have $10 million, you don't need Yale's help. If you apply to Yale, probably you're going to get like rejected or like waitlisted, because clearly you don't need Yale's help, and you're a very successful person, by yourself. You don't need, you don't really need Yale's help. You can just do it by yourself, basically. Whether or not with Yale's help, the candidate is likely to be a leader in whatever he ends up doing. So they are basically the president basically admits that the admissions officers make a hunch. So I guess that's also the ambiguity of college admissions, and which I've explained in my previous podcast and all the videos that I've done, that you know admissions, it is kind of like a hunch. That you have so many qualified applicants, you gotta have like that. You have to feel, for that applicant, which applicant do you think stands out the most? At least this is from like an admissions officer perspective. But the most important thing is they are still looking out for a combination of those who make the most of Yale's resources, that will stretch the limits of their talents, and have outstanding public motivation. So it's the same thing. But even with these three criteria, like there's gonna be many people who achieve these three criteria, and that at the end of the day, sometimes when it comes down to it, it's a very human process. You vote and you see what happens at the end. If the votes, if you have the numbers, then the student's admitted. If not, then somebody else will probably admit him anyways. So the next sentence also is, our goals remain the same today. So which is true. I think Yale does, they haven't really changed over the course of 50 years. And I mean, a lot of schools generally don't change their admissions policies. They might change priorities, but in terms of like qualities, personal quality, it's they have been looking for the same thing, for over 50 years. It's not like all of a sudden, like maybe the only change that they really have is like AI. So maybe like now they're looking for AI literacy also. I think that that's something that, schools are starting to look out for as more and more students use AI. But in general, the last 50 years, all the personal qualities and all the things that make a student, all of these, they still remain the same. Yeah. So decade after decade, Yale's have set out to make our world a better place. So you also have to show how you made the world a better place based on your extracurricular activities and your essays as well. And you need to explicitly show. You can't just say, "Oh, I donated 200 food packs." So I mean, that's very nice. You have made the world better, but the admissions officer can't feel, they can't see. How can I see what's the impact of the 200 food packs? But if, for example, maybe you did an interview with one of the people whom you donated to, and they talked about how, like, the food pack helped them survive through like the winter. And if you can somehow include that in your application, or maybe your counselor mentions it in their letter of recommendation, then all of a sudden, you make the admissions officers feel, and then his or her hunched judgment becomes even better, and they're more likely to admit you. And they also talk about, we're looking for students we can help to become leaders of the generation in whatever they wish to pursue. Same thing again, we are looking for students we can help with Yale's help. So you need to be humble, you need to be mature, you need to acknowledge that what you're doing now, you need Yale's help in order to continue with your mission. You need Yale's resources, you need their expertise. It's not just you, it's about Yale. I mean, because you're applying to an institution, it's never about you, it's about what the institution wants. It's about the school. How can you provide to the school? And more importantly, what can the school provide for you so that in the future, you're a proud Yale alumni and you would give back to Yale, because that, it's because I got accepted into Yale, that's why I'm successful, not the other way around. Like, oh, I made Yale successful. They want students who view Yale as the reason why they succeeded, because that is what alumni donations are about. And that's why people give back, because they feel like they are indebted to Yale. And that's how the school gets a lot of money. But anyways, besides that point, let's move on. That's a bit of a sidetrack. And the next paragraph is, as we carefully and respectfully review every application, 2 questions guide our admissions team. Who is likely to make the most of Yale's resources, and who will contribute most significantly to the Yale community? So I mean, they've already laid it out over here very clearly. Who will make the most of Yale's resources based on what they've done in the past, and who can contribute most significantly to the Yale community. So what sort of diverse academic perspective do you have? So it's not just about, it's about, other than just the stats, because let's just say, like, if you'd raise $1 million, in your charity, in your startup fund, that's very good. You can contribute, you definitely can contribute that, and that's a very significant contribution. But let's just say like maybe you raise like a $5,000. Is that really? I mean, yes. I do agree. 5,000 could be a lot based on your local context. But compared to the person with $1 million, like you pale in comparison to that. So the point I'm trying to make is that numbers can only go so far in a sense where everybody has certain numbers that they're going to preach, that they're going to show. So significant contribution is not just based on pure raw stats, pure raw numbers. It's also based on the ideas. So I'm not saying don't put any numbers in your application. You definitely still need to, but it's a combination of both stats and both what's it called, like non-statistical evidence, like your anecdotes, what you've learned, what's the perspective that you have, your ideas. These are things that you can contribute to Yale's community. And it can be based on your own experiences, like something that's very unique, like a unique take that you have, like a unique hot take. But it has to be not so hot. It has to just be like a unique intellectual take, like what this mission statement says: intellectual, a unique intellectual perspective, a unique moral perspective, a unique civic perspective. And so we move on to the next paragraph. We estimate that a large majority of students who apply for admission to Yale are qualified to do the work here. That is very true. I think there's this number that's thrown around, like, over 80% of students can do the work at like insert whatever college name. And I guess that's true. With grade inflation, it seems like everybody can do the work. Everybody has a 4.0 these days. Everybody has like 1500 SAT. So honestly, yeah, a lot of people can, statistically speaking, do the work. You can't really tell whether someone can actually do the work. They might drop out, for example. But just in general, if you look at it in terms of stats wise, a lot of people can do the work. The great majority of students who are admitted stand out from the rest because of a lot of little things. When added up, tip the scale in their favor. So I love that Yale actually specifically says this statement. I think a lot of schools, like, they don't outright say this, but Yale does. They basically just say that, look, this is holistic review. It's the little things that matter that tip the scale in your favor. And I think that that's very nice, because a lot of schools, like, they don't really specifically say like what they're looking for. They don't even mention that it's holistic review. Like, it's a lot of things. Or they do mention holistic review, but they don't really go into detail. And the detail is that holistic review is a bunch of little things. It's a lot of little things. Your letters of recommendation, your activities, your essays, your transcript. All these little things. The small anecdotes that you have throughout the perspectives that you've learned. The perspectives that you will learn, that you will contribute to Yale. When added up, then it tips the scales in your favor. So, with that information, the admissions committee makes a decision. Most of them not favorable, but some of them, are favorable. And then they also resolve this. So they say, so what matters most in your application? And I agree with this. Ultimately, everything matters. And the good news in that is that when so many little things figure into an admissions decision, it is fruitless to worry too much about any one of them. Okay, this I don't really agree. I feel like before you submit an application, that you can see like 100 things. Like, if you really take a look, I've done the deep dive into my Common App, the 2.5-hour video on my YouTube channel, Elite College Admissions, the context and strategy. You can look at all the little things and try to add them up yourself. And I think the applicants that usually get in, at least not the first gen, not the hooked applicants. The unhooked applicants usually have all these things going on in their favor. Some of them deliberately plan it so that everything adds up. Some of them don't. But hey, if you try your best to add up as many little things as possible, that benefits you. You shouldn't just lay behind and just let the admissions office find those little things for you, because sometimes it might not be there. Sometimes you have to deliberately plant those little things in your application so that the admissions officer can see, they add it up themselves, and then they will give you a favorable decision. And yeah, towards the end, they just say, our advice is to pursue what you love and tell us about that. Be yourself. Ask the teachers who really know to recommend you, apply, and relax. And I mean, I think this is a very nice way to end off what Yale looks for, because there are so many institutional priorities and so many like minor nuances in an admissions decision, like that, if you list it out all on the website, it can take like a 4 hour long podcast, honestly speaking, or a video in order to describe like every single institutional priority, academic areas that they're looking for, personal qualities and whatever. A lot of these things are just instinctual. We have like what the president Kingman Rooster said, we have to make the hunchy judgment. They already admit that at the end of the day, it is a hunch, you know, and sometimes college admissions are random, and you just do your best, put the best foot forward, overthink your application, try and make it the best application that you can possibly give, and then just submit it. Yeah. Okay. So the last part of this deep dive into Yale and what you look for is then the essays. And the essays are honestly just a reflection of the mission statement of Yale College and what Yale looks for, which is why I delved, a lot deeper into those starting two topics. So, short answer questions. This is basically found in the academic section, or I think they specifically put like your academics on top. So this basically they just want you to answer, your based on your academics. So okay, enough of that. The first question that they ask is, students at Yale have time to explore their academic interests before committing to one or more major fields of studies. Many students either modify their original academic direction or change their minds entirely. As of this moment, what academic areas seem to fit your interests or goals most comfortably? Please indicate up to 3 from the list provided. So the reason why I emphasize areas is because you need to show interdisciplinary. You need to be an interdisciplinary student. You need to have that interdisciplinary nature in your application. Unfortunately, for Yale specifically, they already say that you have to explore your academic interests, and they don't bracket the S. It's like fully plural. You know how like when you answer like comprehension questions, they always put like choice and then they put bracket as bracket because there could be one or two choices. But here they don't have that bracket. They clearly want to look for a plural, a multiplicity in terms of your academic interests and your academic areas. And they already say one or more major fields of study. So I'm not sure if Yale is required to put all 3. I think it is, but these 3 you can't take lightly. You really have to think about how you're going to, and I think this is a very good opportunity. Don't just pick the most common is like econs, and then after that pick math and then physics, just because like econs has a lot of math. You really have to deliberately have that academic triangulation. I talked about this in my admissions as a trial. It's on Spotify. It's my podcast, and I talked about like the academic triangulation method. So what are the 3 areas of study that you're going to combine? And so I think at the time I gave an example of how I combine like bioethics, so biology, philosophy, and urban studies, or maybe biology, philosophy, and religion. I can't remember exactly. So these are 3 very like disparate fields, and being able to link them together shows that you're an interdisciplinary student. For me, I put religion/theology, sociology, so the sociological how, the theological why, and the urban context. So I had this triangulation of theology, sociology, and urban studies, and I talked about all of this in my next essay, which is, tell us about a topic or idea that excites you and is related to one or more of the academic areas you selected above. Why are you drawn to it? This is basically asking you, why did you pick the 3 items that you picked? And it has to be a very good answer. So if you talk about like, how you want to do behavioral econs, consumer behavior nudging, and then you put math and physics, then the admissions officer is going to ask, where's the math? Where's the physics? We don't want people just studying econs. We want people to double major, triple major, to have a liberal arts education, to be interested in the liberal arts, to connect different areas of study together in the pursuit of new knowledge. So all of these keywords. And, you have to show in this question, like why do you want to do your three majors or maybe two? I think I'm not sure exactly if it's two or three, but it's best that you show three because most students might show two and then you just show three. And being able to connect these, use this like how why context framework shows that you're taking the time and the effort to really link three areas together, instead of just two. And as long as it makes sense, you're not really overdoing it. Like the greatest thinkers and the greatest minds in the world probably, think interdisciplinary, like they have that interdisciplinary nature in their thinking. They always think about like how different frameworks can apply to different ideas. And I know some people might say, oh, but people just study math, and it's like math is so different. There's like math has like 10 different fields that are honestly completely like separate from one another. Like you have like geometry, planes, natural numbers, imaginary numbers. Like all these things are quite different fields. So but of course they don't expect you to be so specialized in your field that you can like link different parts of your subject matter together. So they just expect like in general, like how are you gonna link your maybe like your biology to your philosophy, to your ethics. How are you gonna link biology to maybe geography, and then how are you gonna link biology, geography, and religion together? I mean, I'm not sure, but there's definitely a way to do this. And then why do you do what you do, which is what I mentioned in my personal statement in my 2.5 hour long video on YouTube. Why are you drawn to this? Why do you do what you do? So spend like 125 words on your three academic areas, and then spend like the last 50 to 75 words on answering the question. So why are you drawn to it? It's very easy to talk about the triangulation of ideas, but then you need to answer, so what makes you interested in this triangulation of ideas? Is it your personal experience? Is it your curiosity? Are there certain ideas that you have that have informed you? You need to show the admissions office that you actually mean what you say. It's very easy to say, but it's very hard to do. So you need to convince them one more layer and say that this, with all that I've mentioned about my interdisciplinary nature, like this is why I want to become an interdisciplinary thinker, because I've experienced XXX. Like I realized that I needed Y and Z in order to boost my knowledge of X. So usually you can think of it in terms of this framework. You can't just think about biology. You want to enhance the knowledge of biology, you need a different field, maybe like philosophy. Like, so why can you, like, I don't know, I give this example, like why is animal cruelty okay? Like, when you do experiments on like mouse or on like rats and mouse, so then you have to answer that. Oh, that's a difficult question to answer, right? Because then you're in the field of like bioethics. Is there a better way? Is there a better way to put down an animal maybe without hurting it, or maybe use like lab grown mice to do experiments, so it's not so bad. So this is the sort of like the creativity and the specificity that you need to go to show the admissions office that you know what you're talking about and you really want to do what you're talking about. The next is a bit of a it's not my favorite essay. So it basically says reflect on how your interests, values, and or experiences have drawn you to Yale. But this used to be this used to be a why Yale question, but a lot of people answered it very poorly. They basically say like, oh, I want to go to Yale because it looks like Harry Potter. Like they talk about Yale, the place, its prestige, its beauty. But you look at this. Does the mission statement talk anywhere about Yale's prestige, Yale's beauty? Maybe just as a globally recognized leader, but that's it. Does this what Yale looks for talk about how beautiful the gardens are? No, it doesn't. So they if you listen to the Yale admissions podcast, they basically say they changed this question from why Yale to this because too many applicants answer it very poorly. But I feel like now uh, it's a bit more different. I feel like why Yale was a lot easier because when I do why school questions, I think about how my experiences link to the school. I already have that normal train of thought. But now here they explicitly say it out, reflect on how your interests, values, and or experiences have drawn you to Yale. Okay. But you can't, so then some students might still reply and say, oh, my brother went to Yale. He said Yale was pretty good, and that's why I want to go to Yale. That's really not it. It's about how your own experiences align with Yale's values. You want to continue to your streak of intellectual curiosity, perhaps. Like, you're a deep thinker. You've always argued, and you've always argued, like, I don't know, not argue, you always discuss with your philosophy teacher about like the meaning of life. But then, like, your philosophy teacher has like only one perspective. You want to go to Yale because you want to have multiple perspectives. So that experience of only being able to talk to one person about philosophy draws me to Yale, because I want to come to Yale and know that I have like way more perspectives to tap on, and professors and resources that can help me to answer this question. You see how I framed it there? It's not just about how you are drawn to Yale, but how Yale benefits you and how you can benefit Yale back. So you provide that unique perspective. Yale gives you the environment to discuss your perspective, and you provide Yale with that unique perspective. And you need to shell this out in your essay, of course. I don't know what's the meaning of life, but if you know what the meaning of life is, then you should definitely write it down. Or if you believe in like what's it called? In philosophy, you have like certain like nihilism, like you have the isms, like you have certain like frameworks that you think through. Maybe like you agree with this framework and you want to discuss with other people, like whether your rationale in accepting this framework is true or not. Then that is your unique perspective, your unique intellectual perspective that you provide to Yale, and that Yale in turn provides you back that environment where instead of just having one teacher questioning you, now you have 6 students in your dorm questioning you, and 3 well-renowned professors also questioning you. Then that's where the pursuit of knowledge, and that's where new knowledge perhaps can come about. Okay, the next one, it is the short answer questions. My take on short answer questions is that only Princeton and Yale and Stanford can ask you these type of questions, because they know that everybody's gonna apply to them anyways. So they can ask you these sort of like, I wouldn't really say it's troll questions, but it's questions. It's questions. It's questions just for the admissions office to sort of just know you better. If any lower ranked school did this, nobody's gonna apply to them. So just it's not common, because nobody has the time. Because people, when it comes to essays, like to overthink about the perfect response, which is why schools like Northeastern get so many applications, because it's very easy. Just press submit, just finish the Common App, do some declarations, press submit, and then boom, you've applied to Northeastern. But then when it comes to schools like Yale, Stanford, and Princeton, where like you have to write about like 1,000+ words of essays, then it gets really very tricky, and it takes like a few days just to complete an application, or to do it well. At least you definitely can't do this in like a few hours. So the first question: what inspires you? Like I always say, so what is your outstanding public motivation? That's, I think, one of the best ways to answer this question. You need to show that what inspires you is a greater public motivation than yourself. You can't talk about how like, oh, because my teacher told me to do this, or like, because my mom told me to do this. This is not very inspiring, unless it's like your mom's on her deathbed, and she told you to go and pursue your dreams, to get a good education, to continue your interest in physics. Then by all means, please write about that. I mean, that is inspiring, honestly speaking. Yeah, but in general, most people don't have this sort of experiences. And if you talk about how like, oh, my teacher told me to investigate the intersection of biology and philosophy because I scored well in her class. No, that's not a good answer. Yeah, the best answer still is what inspires you. That outstanding public motivation. Next is a less strategic question. I mean, you can try to answer it to like in alignment with your application, or you can don't. honestly, the short answer questions are quite chill. Like you can honestly talk about like your personal interests, I guess. For me, I talked about how like I wanted to create like a card game, like a improved card game. Because I made my own like card game that I played at the center called Asset Hunt. So basically just a bunch of like assets, problems and challenges on like cards and like teaching students about how to like um proper properly use assets to solve problems. And I wanted to change it into like a book. I can't remember exactly what I wrote, but something along those lines. So it was a light to my application. But that's just because I dealt with a bit of the arts in terms of creating like my own book, creating my own card game. And that's why like, this question, there's like a sort of like a before and a after. So I had something beforehand that was similar to this and that I could improve upon. But most people might not have. So honestly, you can take this however you want it, however you want it to be. Honestly, I'm just off the top of my head. Like if you're like a philosophy student, you can talk about how you want to talk, the course that you want to teach is like the diverse perspectives of. I don't know, like the diverse perspectives of Hegel, just a random philosopher that I thought of. You can write a book about like your, I don't know, like yeah, honestly, just do this question. Be yourself in this question. You can not be yourself. You can align it to your application, but being yourself in this question isn't really gonna hurt you. Like here they are okay with different responses. Okay. The next question, other than a family member who is someone who has had a significant influence on you, what has been the impact of their influence? Okay, so this is a bit of a more, this is a question to show your maturity. But I will say it is very tempting to talk about like your teacher, or like somebody that's very common, like a teacher, maybe like your mentor who had a significant influence on you. I think that's fine, but that's quite boring. Everybody's gonna write about that. But then again, also, it's like it. This is those type of questions that same thing. You can either be yourself, or you can either align this with your application. So my first draft was about how my mentor, how she taught me like the concept of accompaniment and how she had an influence on me. But then at the last minute, I changed it to Carlos Kleiber. So because I listened to a lot of classical music at the time and still am, that was the conductor that I was listening to, and like I love this music and the way he conducted like Beethoven's fourth and seventh symphonies. So in this question, I chose to be myself. I talked about him, his music, how it made me feel like very free, and just something completely different that they didn't really expect. Because I felt like, how like you see those those Instagram memes, like three original sentences left. Like I wanted to create like an original, something that was special to me, and not following like other people. Whereas the previous question, when I talked about like my card game, I mean that is it. That's that like an improved version of my card game. I think like that in itself is quite unique, but which is why I went with that. But over here, like if you went with like family member, teacher, mentor, then that's not that unique. So maybe you should try to find something different that's not somebody um that is close to you, that had a significant influence that people would expect. So if it's like your family member, your brother, your sister, your teacher, your counselor, your mentor, maybe like one of the students that you were volunteering, they told you something that was revolutionary, something like that. Maybe that's not the best. Yeah. The next is, what is something about you that's not included anywhere else in your application? Uh so this is definitely a be yourself question. There's really no you don't really have to be very strategic about this. I think just answer it truthfully. For me, I wrote about like the fact that I was quite funny. Like I'm a funny person. Cause in one of my awards, so I referenced slightly in my application. I talked about how like I won like second place at like a comic duologue competition in another school. So then I talked about how like, I can be like quite a funny person. Yeah, that was basically it. I mean, it wasn't like a insane like response, but it can be very simple things. Like maybe you do like magic tricks. You do like, what's it called, cardistry. Yeah, cardistry. You have very like unique talents. Maybe like I don't know. You can juggle three items at once. You can play a yo-yo competitively, or you were like a fidget spinner pro before. I'm really just thinking off the top of my head, like just random stuff that at least just makes you look unique. Don't but don't fall into like the common traps. Like, oh, I went traveling to over 50 countries. It's like, whoa, that's a lot of privilege signaling. Or like certain activities that signal a level of privilege don't include here. Just talk about like quirky skills that you can bring to Yale that is very different from like other people. So it shouldn't be something that's very common. But then again, I did answer, being funny. So I'm quite sure many people have wrote about that. But I felt like that was true to me, and that showed a bit of personality, and that's why I kept it in. Okay, lastly, the long essay question. You discuss this in 400 words or fewer. It is a choice of three. Please don't do all three. If you look at the Common App, you can just choose one. So, okay, let's go to the first one. Reflect on the time you discuss an issue important to you with someone holding an opposing view. Why did you find the experience meaningful? I don't like this question. I feel like you put yourself, maybe because I always try to avoid this question. But you put yourself in a very difficult position because this posits that you had a disagreement with someone, you had a negative experience. And I feel like a lot of students don't really know how to convey, and even myself, like how to convey a negative experience with humility and maturity. It's something that's very difficult and it can go wrong very quickly. But the reason why, if you look, why this essay question is here is because, we Yale wants students who are able to bridge differences, to be able to um, reconcile with diverse perspectives. So this also sort of plays into their mission statement because they want students who are able to understand that in society there are going to be many opposing views, and that your ability to discuss, to reconcile with another person's different views is an important part of the residential community experience. You can't just ostracize someone just because they have a different political view from you. Then that's not good. And then why do you find this experience meaningful? So what does this mean to you? Like, what was the new knowledge that was learned? So remember, this question can also help if you gained new knowledge from someone because of like a discussion. Because at the end of the day, I think that it mentions here that provide a supportive residential community of learning in which social experience and the free exchange of ideas underpin the pursuit of knowledge. So how did you discuss with someone, and how do you pursue new knowledge? So your angle for this essay should be about how you talk to someone with an opposing view, and you managed to deal with it like properly with maturity, and then how this experience was meaningful to you by talking about your pursuit of new knowledge, and what were some of the new perspectives, the intellectual perspectives, moral perspectives, civic perspectives that you took away from this experience. So that answers directly into the Yale mission statement, the Yale College mission statement. And I guess that's the strategic way on how to respond to this question. Okay, the next question is reflect on your membership in a community to which you feel connected. Why is this community meaningful to you? You may define community however you like. This is basically the race question. Which is why I say, like, as much as schools try to follow SFFA and not consider race in an application, they provide questions like these that clearly allude, or like that my membership in the Asian community, the Latino community, the Black community to which I feel connected to because I have my cultural roots there. People are not dumb. They're going to talk about their culture here, which they should, because all schools want a diversity of culture. Unless you're Asian or white, then I don't know whether. Okay, that's also a very contentious issue. I think you can, if you're Asian or white, talk about a membership in a community, but you really need to be very specific and you need to be very different. You can't just talk in, for example, in Asian culture about like familial values. Like, come on, is going to write about that. Something that, so if you're from an overrepresented minority or just the majority, which is Caucasians, whites in general, you need to be very specific. You need to show the admissions committee that you have a very unique perspective. Reflecting the membership in a community, the strategic way is also to talk about an intellectual community. So I come from an intellectual community of like philosophers, of scholars, of biologists, you know, but I feel like you can't force it. You need to show through your application that you were part of this community. So you can't just say, I can't just say, oh, I was part of a biology, like a group of biology scholars, you know, but then you didn't really participate in like a biology club. You didn't really have, you did research with a mentor, then where's the community? You can't just self-identify yourself as part of an intellectual community without actually being actually being in an intellectual community and proving through your application that you were part of that intellectual community. So it's about it's about what your application can also prove. You can't just go around saying things without having the proof, because then it would seem ingenuine. So they also talk about, you may define community however you like. So you can talk about race, you can talk about intellectual community, you can talk about very different communities, honestly. This application is quite this can be quite this question is quite wide ranging. You can talk about how like you come from a community of like environmentalists, like not really intellectual, but maybe an activist community. But then you also need to talk about why this community is meaningful to you and how you would bring it to Yale. They don't say this explicitly because I think they want you to talk more about yourself here. But you need to spend at least 50 to 100 words going back. You are applying to Yale. You need to provide something to Yale that they don't have. And you need to show that in your essays. So after talking about 300 to 350 words about your membership in a community that's meaningful to you, that you have, then how are you going to bring this to Yale? How does this enrich the Yale community? And that goes to my third question. The second and third questions are honestly quite similar. Reflect on an element of your personal experience that you feel will enrich your college. How has it shaped you? That's basically what the second question should, which is why I don't really like the second question, because it's like a trap, because it the way it's asked makes it seem like it's all about you, which it is. They want to know more about you, but you also need to talk about how you will enrich, Yale College, and you need to link back to the school that you're applying to. You can't just talk all about yourself. Also, another reason being is that if it's too general, like it's very clear that you copied and pasted the essay. You need to show the admissions officer that this essay can only be used for Yale. It's exclusive to Yale, and not really for other people. So, the third question, I think it's quite well asked. Reflect on an element of your personal experience. You can replace this with reflect on your membership in a community that will feel enrich your college. I think the only time where you should pick number 2 is if you talk about race, to which you feel connected to, and maybe intellectual. If not, I think do 3 about personal experiences. Personal experiences are definitely, membership in a community is already very broad. Personal experience is even more broader. Personal experience can just basically be anything, because whatever you experience in life is a personal experience. So basically, 3 is a lot more broad, and I feel it's a lot more directed because it forces you to link back. So how will my personal experience in a community, for example, enrich the college, and how has it shaped me, and which is similar to why is this meaningful to you. So I talked about like my army experience, how like there were certain struggles that I faced when I was in army, and like, I learned through these struggles, and then this would enrich the college, and like I provide that military perspective that to the college, and that shaped me in a certain way, and I linked it to like my service mission and my personal qualities of like maturity and humility. So that was how I went about with this. I could have talked about membership in a military community, But I just decided to go with personal experience because I feel that's what I felt more comfortable with, and I felt like I was adhering more to the question. By the end of the day, admissions officers don't really look at the question that you put. Like, it's mainly about the content of the essay. Same as like the personal statement, the 6 questions that they give you. You don't really need to adhere to it. Just make sure the content is there and then try to fit, the best question in. So yeah. Then I think that's pretty much it for this deep dive into Yale's mission statement, what they look for, their essays. And yeah, if anything, please email me at hello@elitecollegeadmissions.info, or now you can check out my new website, www.elitecollegeadmissions.info. If you have any questions, you can comment, send me an email, or book a meeting with me. I will be more than happy to answer them. And yeah, see you in the next video.